if you're a politician, and one of the things you want to ask yourself is like, how many things do you actually want to be responsible for?
That's right.
It's like, why not farm some of this out to competent people? It's the only way, and that's just part of this efficiency issue. You know, as the scale of my operations have grown, the only way I've been able to manage that is to make sure that I have competent people around me and then give them their fiefdom. And I do not micromanage. It's like, you can either do this or you can't. If you can't, I'm going to find someone else right away because this has to be done. But if you can do it, good, do it. Right. And then I can go do something else that I can do or that I want to do. And that distribution, it's like, why wouldn't you capitalize on the willingness of private companies to bear some of the damn risk and to help you with the messaging? Go ahead, Greg. One of the things that's really interesting from a Canadian perspective to go down to the US is how cinematic the culture is. Like everything's like a big movie. New York City is like that. It's like, it's just cinematic everywhere. And your culture is immensely powerful in generating motivational narratives. It's second to none in that. And everyone all around, well, that's why America is so dominant culturally. And so much of the messaging is positive. I mean, look at the Marvel movies just as an example. That's a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And that's all aiming upward. Like, it's all positive. You're so good at that. It's just ridiculous. And so it doesn't seem to me to be impossible to do something like celebration of, well, this methane treatment plant, for example, and to elevate it up to something worthy of genuine and deep admiration, because it really is that. It is that. It's like, how good is that?
Yeah, let me say
so
something
good
about Greg's point. It's a really good point about messaging. And again, you know, this is I think the disconnect between the engineering and the communications people, because the engineers will report the improvements in terms of metrics. They'll say, well, we get, you know, so many hundreds of cars per hour across this lane with this new facility, you know, and that doesn't sell, you know, but that could
it's
be
not a story. The story is a single mother who can now get to work and back to her kids an hour earlier. Engineers are temperamentally different from those who would communicate. So engineers are fundamentally interested in things.
Yes.
That's part of, and the communicative types are fundamentally interested in people. And so the engineers are going to say they are interested in things. It's like, oh, here's a bunch of thing stories. Right. Well, that doesn't work. It's not a story. And people actually care, who are in the political and the private realm, that we do get benefits from this. Because this idea that's so cynical, you know, the right looks at government and thinks, oh, it's full of corrupt people only up for themselves. And then the left looks at businesses and say, well, it's all full of corrupt people only out for themselves. And it's like, it's simply not true. That is like, there's corruption in every endeavor, but it's a small percentage of the endeavor in a functioning country. And the idea that everybody is only self-interested, well, first of all, that's a confession, not a theory. And second, it's simply not true. Like, the more people I've met, the more I've been struck by the fact that there's so many good people working on both sides of an argument, and they're working for high and noble purposes.
I agree,
and
totally.
High and noble purposes exist.
No.
So no cynicism. I was stunned when I went to New York City, to Manhattan. You know, it looked like it did 5 years ago, except it was cleaner. And I thought, and then I noticed that, well, everybody was just back on the streets. This had just reopened. I thought, just think about this. That city was shut down for 18 months and it still works. Right. It's like, what the hell? That's a miracle. That's an absolute miracle. And if everyone was corrupt and power-seeking and malevolent and only out for themselves, that is not how that city would look.
No. And it is amazing, given the level of activity and the density and the restaurants and the waste and the, you know, it's amazing. It's amazing it does work. But you know, as I said, Jordan, at the outset, I come from this, you know, neoclassical free enterprise kind of perspective. But the longer I've been dealing with infrastructure, the more respect and admiration I have for the public people who have, you know, are largely dedicating their careers to making this stuff work. They really do have a public interest, you know, desire embedded in them, which is nice, right? It's nice to see that. And they take their job. They could all make more money in the private sector, probably. But
yeah,
they've
definitely.
chosen these
and
these
be easier.
paths.
you know, and the rewards would be bigger and there might be more security. I mean, look, when Greg and I went to Washington 4 years ago, and one of the things we did was host a couple of lunches, and we had relatively junior Democrat Congress people and Republican Congress people just come to lunch because they don't get a chance to meet each other, partly because they're raising money 25 hours a week. and plus they're up for re-election in 2 years. Like, these are busy people.
Right.
And so the first thing we did was just had everybody introduce themselves and talk for 5 minutes. It was like, why are you doing this? That was the question. And you could not tell the Democrats from the Republicans. Every story was the same. It was like, well, you know, I'm kind of a serious person and I would really like to serve my country. And I felt that although I had other opportunities, that this was worth a sacrifice. And I was hoping I could come to Washington and really make a difference. And like, you listen to 8 people say that, and these aren't trivial people, and they're not grandstanding because there's no audience. It's like, they're just saying what it is. And you can be cynical about that if you want, but you're a fool if you are, because that means you're cynical about the most noble ambitions of people who are making a genuine sacrifice. These are hard jobs. And it's so nice to hear from you that you've been in the trenches working on these practical projects, and the consequence for you is that you've become like more optimistic and pleased with the characters of the people you're dealing with.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
hooray.
Let me be clear, Jordan. We should be clear. There are cases where infrastructure delivery is rife with corruption, and there's the Odebrecht in Brazil. You may be familiar with that scandal. In South America, it's Brazilian construction company was bribing public officials to be the winning bidder, and prime ministers went to prison. So it's not some pure, it's the real world of humanity, right? It's not a pure thing, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule.
Well, psychopaths are 3% of the population, not 97%. Yeah, and they never get above 5% before they're culled, essentially. Wow. 1 to 5%, and the basic, the stable point of psychopathy prevalence is 3%. And so the idea that it's just malevolent power seeking that drives hierarchical organizations is just wrong in the face of it, because otherwise there'd be way more psychopaths and they'd be way more successful. Mm-hmm. So yeah, these are exceptions, especially in highly functioning societies. And the US, I mean, there isn't a society that's ever been more highly functioning than the US, all things considered.
Wow.
So
I'm glad to hear that.
Well, I don't think that's an unreasonable proposition. I mean, it's the economic driver in some sense of innovation throughout the free world. I mean, there's other countries that are doing well, but America is really a kind of epicenter, and everyone knows it. And so it's huge. I mean, 300 million people. That's a lot of middle class people, man.